Last year I read hardly anything, so this year I challenged myself to read 15 minutes a day. It's now mid-February, the end of February, and I've read quite a few books so far this year for me. I'm a very slow reader and I'm also a very distractible person, but I wanted to show you what I've read so far because interestingly quite a lot of these, the majority of these are actually non-fiction pieces of writing. I haven't been reading 15 minutes a day. Some days I've been always reading and then other days I just haven't picked up a book. But so far I've done quite well in January. Now I've actually started to dip off, but I've just started reading a new book, which I'll talk about in the end, which I think is going to get me back into the flow that I had that was so good at the beginning of January. The first book I read was The 6 Wives of Henry VIII by Alison Weir. This was a reread for me. I first read it when I was about 12, 13. It was the second book about Henry VIII that I ever read, the first one being the one by David Starkey. The reason I picked this up again was because I love Henry VIII and his 6 wives, but living in London, there's always sirens. Last year I picked up some of Alison Weir's fiction work, and the reason she was writing fiction was because she was revisiting the 6 wives of Henry VIII and their lives. Because she'd been doing new research and she found out so much that maybe has just come out about the 6 wives or that she hadn't included in this biography, and she wanted to write that into fiction, but she also said she was rewriting this biography to give an updated version, and I am so excited for that, and I really hope that it does come true because I think Alison Weir's non-fiction writing, her historical writing is amazing. I think it is better than her fiction, and I knew that if that book ever came out I would be desperate to read it, but I wanted to read her analysis of the 6 wives. This one was first published, let me find, should have done this before, 1991, published in 1992, it was published in 1991. Each historian comes with their own biases, and it's interesting when you read how she portrays Catherine of Aragon versus Anne Boleyn, because even though it's very separate, Alison Weir loves Catherine of Aragon, so you can always kind of tell that a little bit, and in the fiction. My love of 6 wives has been going on since I was about 5. I've read as much as I could read about them. I personally was always a massive Anne Boleyn fan, like I love her, but when I read this, and in fact when I read her fiction writing, I really fell in love with Catherine of Aragon in a way that I hadn't really considered her before, and I think her story and her history is fantastic because, you know, when we look at a lot of history, it always begins at the end of Catherine of Aragon's relationship with Henry VIII. Majority of series or films I've ever seen, it's always when Anne Boleyn kind of comes into court and seduces Henry, and Catherine of Aragon is seen as this old bitter wife, but in reality she was a really spirited young woman and had her own strengths and complexities to her, like every single one of the wives did. So I loved learning more about her. I was also interested to learn more about Jane Seymour because I'm an Anne Boleyn fan, so revisiting this for me was just a complete pleasure because she is such a good writer. I'm also now going to see, slightly related but kind of related, Ben has booked me tickets to see the musical 6, which is a modern musical about the 6 wives of Henry VIII, and I am obsessed with it and the whole soundtrack. I know every line and I can't wait. So at the moment I am really into getting back into Henry VIII. The next book is another piece of historical non-fiction, and it's The 5 by RubinHold. This is one of the best pieces of non-fiction I've ever read. I am a true crime obsessive and I love reading about murder and everything like that. I'm a big My Favorite Murder fan, etc, etc. And it documents the lives of the canonical 5, the 5 women murdered by Jack the Ripper. Living in London especially, I've noticed this really weird relationship we have with Jack the Ripper. You can go on Jack the Ripper tours, and I have always felt slightly troubled by that, even though I love true crime and there's lots of problematic natures to enjoying true crime. But you can go on a tour where you can see where women were murdered. And this book completely overthrows any notions about the women that we've created Majority of them were created by myth, and basically reducing women to the point where they're no longer human and deserve to be killed. In true crime, there's often a nature of kind of the ideal victim, and often the ideal victim is an innocent, young, white, blonde girl. And when victims don't fall into that, or if they are black, or if they are trans, they're often ignored because their lives aren't seen as being worthy enough. This book does not talk about Jack the Ripper. It is not interested in who he was, what he looked like, where he came from. This book gives the women back their voices just like they deserved. It talks about the 19th century and addiction and domestic violence in a really empathetic way, but also using the historical narrative to really showcase the lives of these women and also the real troubles that they experienced in their lives. It is only by bringing these women back to life that we can silence the Ripper and what he represents. By permitting them to speak, by attempting to understand their experiences and see their humanity, we can restore them to the respect and compassion to which they are entitled. The victims of Jack the Ripper were never just prostitutes. They were daughters, wives, mothers, sisters, and lovers. They were women, they were human beings, and surely that in itself is enough. And on the cover design, on the hardback cover, it has their names on. And I think it is a beautiful dedication to these women. It also was just an amazing analysis of 19th century society in a way that is often overlooked, for working class women, for sex workers, again dealing with issues around addiction and domestic violence and poverty. If you're interested in the 19th century, if you're interested in true crime or in just women in general, I can't recommend The Five enough. And now another true crime book. This is The Suspicions of Mr. Witcher by Kate Summerscale. I have heard so much about this book, and this is one of the beautiful Bloomsbury modern classics, which I adore. I think these are the most beautifully designed books ever. This book is a classic piece of true crime non-fiction, and I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it as much as I thought I was going to love it. In a similar way to The Five, it looks into attitudes towards women and crime and the idea of being a murderess, as well as kind of unpacking the role of the police and detectives in the 19th century. It is these cases that kind of led to the creation of Sherlock and what we think about a detective. It was a good book. I just thought that I would love this book. I just thought it would be one of the best I'd ever read. And I enjoyed it. It was interesting, but I didn't have the same love that I felt when I finished The Five. I then picked up West. I picked this up from a bookshop in Kensington that I love, and it has lots of books for like really cheap prices, and I've been wanting to read West for a while. It is about a father who discovers kind of myths around big creatures being discovered in the West and begins his journey leaving his sister and young daughter to go and discover these monsters. I didn't love it as much as I hoped I would. I kind of thought it was okay. It's a novel about grief. The grief that the father and the daughter carry is in each and every page. I can't say too much about this book because it is so short. It's a novella without spoiling it, and there is some stuff that I want to discuss, but you can't really discuss without telling you what happens in the novel. I like the idea of the separation of the natural space, the West, these grand landscapes, and then the domestic sphere, which is equally as dangerous and as restricted. But I felt a little bit let down by it. I could write an essay on this. I could compare it to some kind of, you know, great American traveller novels. Any book, when I finish it and makes me want to write an essay, is a sign that there is a lot in here, but it doesn't necessarily mean I have the same emotional connection to it. Now on to another meh novel. Another book that I wasn't too keen on, and it is The Warden by Anthony Trollope. One of my 2020 resolutions this year was to read more Trollope. Well, no, to read any Trollope. I've never read a Trollope novel before, to read more Dickens. I should also add that I want to read my first Collins novel. But anyway, I want to read more Victorian literature. I picked The Warden because it is the shortest. It's the first novel in the Barchester Chronicles, and it was okay. It was a lot of old men sitting around a table talking about the church, churches and money. I know that this first novel is setting up the characters and it's setting up the context for this entire series. It was okay. There were bits with the Warden's daughter and kind of the glimpse of romance, and I was like, I love this. The characterization is amazing. I know that Trollope is a writer that I would probably really enjoy if I read the next one. I definitely want to read some more, but I have to be honest, books in series have always scared me. I'm not afraid of big novels, like a lot of people are. I'm afraid of series because I just don't seem to have the dedication to read more than one. I've always been a very much standalone person. The only time I'm not needy. The only series I've ever read is Twilight. That's it. That's all I have to my name. This edition of The Warden I also want to speak about really quickly because it's a yellowback, and these were printed by Vintage Books for W.H. Smiths. But the yellowbacks were, in the 19th century, were cheap, popular editions of novels. They weren't necessarily classics back then, but they were sold really cheaply at train stations and really encouraged literacy and led to more people reading. And it began really the association as well with going on a train journey and reading a novel. They are all the books that I've read so far in January and February. As I said at the beginning, I have felt my need to read slightly slowed down, whereas in January, I think like everybody, I was full of the spirit of doing my reading challenge and really starting to read, and you're full of optimism, and then real life hits you and you're back at work, and then everything slows down. But last night I started to read a book which actually I think will hopefully keep me motivated to carry on reading, and that is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. This is not the first time I've tried to read Wolf Hall. I think when I first read it I probably was maybe a bit too young, I guess, but I literally picked it up last night and it just clicked, and I was like, this is a really good novel. I want to read it all. I've only started it. I'm only in kind of chapter 1, so I'm hoping that I will fall in love with this novel. There is no reason that I wouldn't like this book. As I said at the beginning, I love the Tudor period, and it's something that I consider myself to be quite knowledgeable about, and Hilary Mantel is amazing with her research, and I saw her in a talk actually, was it last year? Maybe in 2018, I saw at the South Bank and talking about Wolf Hall and The Mirror and the Light, which is obviously coming out in March. Another reason was a good time for me to read this right now, because when people are talking about books, it kind of keeps me going, it keeps me engaged with it. Whereas sometimes if I read it when the hype has died down, I kind of forget a little bit and I'm not as motivated. But right now everyone's talking about Hilary Mantel, so it's a good time for me to read it. But anyway, I saw her talking about Wolf Hall and the way she was talking about research and her characters, and when she kind of read a bit of her work, I was really engaged with it and really interested. So I definitely want to read it because it's like one of the most famous pieces of historical fiction ever. So I'm hoping that I'll enjoy it. This is a new edition actually that Fourth Estate brought out to match the Mirror and the Light, which I'm really glad they did, because I hate when they do books like the original covers for this and Bring It the Bodies was so different from the hardback they've designed for The Mirror and the Light, which is beautiful, by the way. If you haven't seen it, it's absolutely stunning. So I'm glad they repackaged these, ready for the third novel, so people can get a full series that fit together and look great, because that's one of my bugbears. This is the second book in the series, and I think this is just stunning. I think this is probably going to be one of my favourite cover designs of all time. I think that's about me. I want to know how you've been doing with your own reading challenges, whether you've wanted to read more this year. Let me know what you're reading, and I'm hoping the next time I see you I will have continued to read rather than just sit at home on my sofa worrying about things and not reading, which is my normal state of affairs.